If you haven't done a lot of work with databases in the past, you might not be familiar with this idea of relational databases, but it's a powerful tool that I want to explore in this movie. The idea behind relational databases is simple. We have a single subject that has a one-to-many relationship with a bunch of pages. And we can see that in play when we look at the sample of the CMS. One subject has many pages below it. So we have a parent and a child type relationship. Now, the advantage to this is that instead of recording the subject name on each and every page, the subject name can be stored in a separate table, in a separate item for the subject. And when we want to change the subject name, we change the name there, and it then trickles down to all of its children. All of the pages then can refer to the same subject and get its updated name. And we don't have to change it a lot of places. It's that don't repeat yourself thing that we've been looking at as we've been programming. So how do we actually apply this one-to-many relationship to our database? Right now, we have a table of subjects that has an ID, a menu name, position, and visible. And we have pages that has ID, menu name, position, visible, and content. There's no relationship between the two right now. We can find something in the subject table, we can find something in the page table, but there's no way for us to know which pages belong to the subjects. And we can do that by adding a subject ID to the pages. Now, we're going to add the subject ID to pages, not the other way around, because it's a one-to-many relationship. And we want to record who is the parent of this subject. Instead of trying to tell the subject, look, here are a list of all of my children, because that would be a very long list. This way we can very succinctly say, that's who my parent is. That's who I have a relationship with. So it's through this subject ID that we're going to have a link. And we're going to then be able to pull up a page and say, okay, page, what's your subject ID? Oh, it's 1? Great, let's go over to the subject table and look up ID 1 and see what subject belongs there. And vice versa. We can say, oh, subject 1, what are your pages? Let's go to the page table and we'll do some SQL to look up everything that has subject ID of 1. Now, subject underscore ID could be called something else. And if you're more comfortable calling it something else, that's fine. For me, I think it makes a lot of sense to call it the subject singular underscore ID and then to match it with ID over in subjects. You'll see a lot of developers will also call the ID field in subjects subject underscore ID, but I think that's kind of understood, and it's easier for me if I always just have something called ID at the top of every single one of my tables that's my primary key. So now let's go back into PHP and actually make this change to our database so that we'll have a relationship and a relational database in place between subjects and pages. So I'm going to go back to my pages database that I created, and I'm going to need to add a new field here. And phpMyAdmin says down here, add one field, which is exactly what I want to do, at the end of the table, at the beginning of the table, or somewhere else. Now you can put it anywhere. The order doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and just say after ID. I like to keep all of my IDs and all of my relationship IDs near the top. So after ID, and then I'll click Go, and it'll come up and ask me to fill in that same information. And we're going to call this subject ID. And since it was an integer on the other one, we want it to be an integer here, and we'll go ahead and make it 11 because that'll be the same size that's allowed in the subject ID field. And we don't need to say anything else at all. And we'll just say save. And we've now altered it, and we've added our subject underscore ID. Now the relationship has been created. Now, MySQL doesn't relate them in a permanent and dynamic way, but it gives us a way to call them. It gives us a way to refer to them in a relational way. So whenever we want to talk about pages, we can look up what the subject is, and whenever we want to look at subjects, we can look up what pages belong to it. And we'll see that as we keep working. But we've now created our first relationship. Now, we don't need a relationship between users and subjects and pages because users doesn't have a relationship. Users is going to be a table on its own that we're just going to check and see if someone exists or not, and based on that, either log them in or out. We don't need to keep a relationship. Now, we could, for example, create a relationship and keep track of which user created a subject or which user last edited a subject. We can come up with more complex relationships, but I don't want to get too deep into those and come up with confusing relationships and more advanced features. I want to stick to the basics here. So for now, we just have a relationship between subject and pages. And if you think back to that diagram we had with the subject at the top and all the pages at the bottom, It'll help you to keep it straight in your head. Now our databases are completely built. We're ready to move on to actually building our application. Step 1 was blueprinting. Step 2 is getting the databases in order. And step 3 is going to be building the place where our website is going to live and getting some basic folder structure set up there so we can start dropping code in. Let's do that in the next movie.